الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قال الشيخ الإمام العالم الحافظ زكي الدين أبو محمد عبد العظيم بن عبد القوي بن محمد بن المنذري عبد العظيم بن عبد القوي بن عبد الله المنذري رحمه الله تعالى. الحمد لله الموفق لسلوك سبل رشده المنعم بشمول رحمته وسعة رفده، أحمده حق حمده وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له شهادة من اعتصم به في صدره وورده، وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله الوفي بعهده، صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وأصحابه والتابعين من بعده صلاة دائمة باقية ما توجه قاصد لقصده. وبعد، فقد سألتني أن أجمع لك 40 حديثا تحفظها من أحاديث الأحكام وملازمة درسها على ممر الأيام، وأن تكون بغير إسناد ليسهل عليك هذا المراد. وقد استخرت الله تعالى وأجبتك إلى مرغوبك وبادرت إلى مطلوبك، وخرجتها مما خرجه البخاري ومسلم رحمهما الله في صحيحيهما، وانفرد به أحدهما راغبا إلى الله تعالى أن ينفعني بها وإياك وسائر المسلمين أجمعين، إنه أرحم الراحمين.
الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على نبينا محمد وآله وصحبه أجمعين. أما بعد، فاللهم انفعنا بما علمتنا وعلمنا ما ينفعنا وزدنا علما تنفعنا به. اللهم إنا نسألك من اليقين ما تهون به علينا مصائب الدنيا، ونسألك اللهم الشوق إلى لقائك في غير ضراء مضرة ولا فتنة مضلة. نسألك اللهم برد العيش بعد الموت. اللهم زينا بزينة الإيمان واجعلنا هداة مهتدين. The treatise that we begin with tonight is titled The 40 Ahadith in Jurisprudence fil Ahkam, written by the great Imam Abu Muhammad Abdul Azim ibn Abdul Qawi al-Munthiree rahimahullah ta'ala. And before we begin our reading from this treatise, I want to briefly introduce the author so that we know who this great scholar is before we begin studying his compilation. As for the author, he is the great Imam and the famous memorizer, a scholar of fiqh, a historian, a linguist, a man of solid religion, and from the Imams of this Ummah, known by the title Zaki ud-Din and the kunya Abu Muhammad. His name is Abdul Azim ibn Abdul Qawi ibn Abdullah ibn Salama ibn Sa'd ibn Sa'id al-Munthiree al-Misri. His origin is from the Levant. However, his father is Misriyun, Egyptian, both in terms of place of birth and in terms of place of stay. commonly known and referred to as Ibn Abdul Qawi. So many times you will see references in the books of the scholars to a man known as Ibn Abdul Qawi, this is him. Or referred to as Abdul Azim al-Munthiree or Zakiyuddin al-Munthiree. All of these are references to the same scholar. He was born in the first of the month of Sha'ban in Qawm al-Jarih, place in Egypt, in the year 581 to the Hijrah of Rasulullah ﷺ. This is where he grew up and this is where he was raised. His father was keen on knowledge and he had a great deal of love for it. So his father made sure that he sat down in the classes of the scholars of Hadith from an early age. In fact, he began attending in the year 591. How old does that make him? 10 years old, sitting with the scholars of Hadith. A year later, his father died. So he grew up as an orphan from that age. In fact, in the month of Ramadan of 592, his father passed away. However, the young man that he was, or the child, he had developed an affection for knowledge and an interest in it. So he continued attending with the scholars and going to the classes and benefiting and learning. He took the Hadith and he took other branches of knowledge from the scholars of his area, directly from them. And if you go back to the books of reference, you will see something very strange. Strange to the common folks, very common to the scholars. You will see that he attended with an extremely large number of scholars. In fact, when all his teachers were counted, their names filled 14 volumes. The number of teachers he had that he took knowledge from filled 14 volumes. However, to make this clear, because someone may say life is not long enough. Well, these are not all scholars he took from directly. Some of them are people he wrote to and they wrote back with knowledge. So they are included as his teachers. Nonetheless, those we did attend with face to face are an amazing number of scholars and teachers. The first scholar he took the hadith from is Abu Abdullah Muhammad ibn Hamad ibn Hamid al-Ansari rahimahullah ta'ala, who was also from the scholars born and raised in Egypt. He died in the year 601. Al-Munthiree said about him, he is the first sheikh that I have taken the hadith from. There was a masjid near their house known as Masjid al-Wazir ibn al-Furat. Al-Munthiree studied with the imam or the sheikh of that masjid, a virtuous man, Abouzeid Mahmud ibn Abdullah ibn Matruh al-Misri. He studied the Quran with him. And in that same masjid, one of the great imams used to teach Al-Hafiz Abu Muhammad Abdul Ghani Al-Maqdisi. Who is this? We should know him. Ahsant. The Shaykh, the scholar who wrote Umdatul Ahkam. We should know this. Why? Because we studied some of those ahadith. And in the month of Rajab, the year 596, Al-Hafiz Abdul Ghani gave him an ijazah, meaning authorized him to narrate on his behalf. And then he studied the Quran with the 7 famous readings in the old masjid, Masjid Amr ibn al-As, and he began taking the fiqh of Al-Imam al-Shafi'i. Although his father was a Hanbali and he started learning as a Hanbali, he decided to switch to the Shafi'i madhab and found that it is closer to the evidence. And after a while, he traveled to Alexandria. And he came back, and he traveled, and he came back several times to take from the knowledge of its scholars. And he traveled to Dimyat, and to Al-Mansura, and Samanoon, and Bilbis, and to the south known as Al-Sa'id of Egypt. And he then left Egypt and went to Gaza in Hisham, in the Levant, and Bayt al-Maqdis many times. And this is the way of the scholars. That wherever the knowledge can be found, they will travel to it and take it from those who have it. From the most famous of his teachers, Abu Hassan Ali ibn Mufaddal al-Maqdisi al-Iskandari, born in the year 544 to the Hijrah, who died in the year 611. Al-Munthiree, from amongst all his teachers, stuck to him. لازمه ملازمة تامة. Any time that he could spend with him, he would be with the Shaykh. And he read upon him the books, and he explained them to him. And he wrote a lot of what the Shaykh was dictating. And he said, I benefited from him a great amount of benefit. The Shaykh was known for having a great amount of thirst for knowledge. And likewise, he was known for having a sharp intellect. So anytime he found a scholar in his journeys, he would try to benefit from him and take as much as he could from him. So in addition to the scholars that he met face to face and he studied with, he also wrote to scholars in other areas that he could not go to and could not meet face to face, asking them to authorize him with their knowledge. So an example of that is a number of the scholars of Baghdad, for he never traveled to Baghdad. And a number of the scholars of Damascus, likewise he never traveled to it. In addition to those who met, he met in it. And a number of other scholars in areas that he could not travel to, he would write to them and ask them to authorize him to narrate from their knowledge, and so they would send to him whatever was possible to send. So he gained a great amount of knowledge by exposure to scholars even outside of the areas that he could reach. The Shaykh was also a great teacher. And this is something that is obvious when you see the list of names of his students. For indeed from among them are those who became great scholars, such as the famous Imam Ibn Daqiq al-Eid, rahimahAllah ta'ala. He was from his students. And in fact, from the students of his students also became great Imams, such as Al-Dhahabi, rahimahullah ta'ala. Al-Imam Al-Dhahabi, the author of Siyar A'lam Al-Nubala, is from the students of Abdul Qawi Al-Munthiree. Now, given that he studied with Al-Hafidh Abdul Ghani, there is another man that we expect that he studied with as well. Who would that be? Abdul Ghani died in the year 600, Ibn Taymiyyah in the year 721, تقريبا. Big difference between them, right? So it cannot be. Who else would he have studied with? We should also know this. At least some of us should know this, because we mentioned something about it. Who is the companion of Abdul Ghani al-Maqdisi when they used to be students of knowledge together studying? Relatives. And they used to study together. One of them went towards al-Hadith and the other one went towards al-Fiqh. Al-Muwaffaq Ibn Qudama, rahimahullah ta'ala, the author of that great encyclopedia of fiqh titled as Al-Mughni, who also happens to be the author of Lum'atu Al-I'tiqad. Some of us have studied it in this masjid. Al-Muwaffaq is also from the teachers and scholars that Al-Hafidh Al-Munthiree took from and benefited from. Al-Muwaffaq was described as the vault of the Islamic fiqh. Yani all the Islamic fiqh was stored in that man. So he left his mark on Al-Hafidh Al-Munthiree rahimahullah ta'ala, and he benefited from him a great amount of benefit. In the year 615 to the Hijrah, Abu Bakr ibn Muhammad ibn Ayyub passed away. He was the ruler of Egypt at the time. His son Muhammad ibn Abi Bakr took over and became the ruler. This man who took over the rule of Egypt was a man that was very keen on knowledge. He had a love for knowledge and for learning, and a great amount of respect for the scholars. In fact, he was a student of knowledge himself, and he attended the scholars' classes in Hadith, and he memorized to the point that he could narrate. And he would make the scholars attend in his gatherings once a week. Although he was busy in the affairs of ruling the lands and so on and so forth, he would make the scholars meet with him every week. And he would pose questions that involve a lot of research and finer points. And and he would discuss with the scholars issues of knowledge. In fact, it was known about him that he would talk about the Sahih of Imam Muslim with very precise and beautiful speech. And he had a great interest and knowledge in the Sahih of Imam Muslim. He was a man that glorified the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and glorified the people who were its scholars and carriers. For this reason, he established a school known as Darul Hadith Al-Kamiliyyah, which became one of the most famous schools of Hadith in the world. In the year 621. And he made that school a waqf upon those who are studying the prophetic narrations, the narrations of Rasulullah ﷺ. What does the word waqf mean? Reference. An endowment. This is probably the closest translation. In other words, that the benefit of this school, of this building, and all its resources and structures attached to it and so on and so forth, is for those who are studying the Hadith. Yani free room, free board if possible, etc., etc. They get everything they need for the students of the Hadith of Rasulullah ﷺ. Our scholar Ibn Abd al-Qawi al-Munthiree, he ended up becoming the head of Al-Kamiliyyah later on in his life. And once he took over, he stayed at its head until he passed away. For 20 years, the Shaykh stayed in that school, and it is mentioned that he would never leave it except for Salat al-Jumu'ah. He was very busy with the affair of knowledge and teaching and spreading the benefit, to the point that the only time he is known to have left the school is for Salat al-Jumu'ah. Even the other prayers he would attend where? In the school's masjid. A story is mentioned when his son, the memorizer, whose name was Muhammad, died in the year 643. They performed Salat al-Janaza in the school, and the Shaykh walked with the funeral procession all the way to the school's gate, and then he let them leave without him. He didn't want to leave it, and he said to the body of his son as they were taking it away, أودعتك يا ولدي الله تعالى. I have left you with Allah, lofty is He, O my son. And did not want to leave the school. He was the third amongst a number of great scholars to become the head of that school. So Munthiree was the third man to take charge of Al-Kamiliyyah. Because of his position and his involvement in that school, the number of his students is beyond the ability to count. However, a number of them have become very well known and extremely famous. However, his level of knowledge and his rank in it had become such that even some of his teachers, some of the scholars that he studied with, would take knowledge from him. An example of that teachers that he learned from, who ended up taking knowledge from him, is Abu Barakat Abdul Rahman ibn al-Hasan al-Ansari, known as Ibn al-Qassar. He took knowledge from him. This man died in the year 613 to the Hijrah. In other words, the Shaykh was how old? 32 years old. Correct? He was born in the year 581. Also, from those who took knowledge from him, from his teachers, Abu al-Ghanaim Musafir ibn Ya'mur ibn Musafir al-Jizi. He died in the year 620. Likewise, Zakiyuddin Abu Qasim Abdul Rahman ibn Abdul Wahhab, who's known as Ibn Wahib al-Qusi, he took knowledge from him as well. And from the scholars of his time are those who were his peers, they were his same level, they were not his teachers, who also took knowledge from him, such as Al-Hafiz Abu Bakr Muhammad ibn Abdul Ghani al-Baghdadi, known as Ibn Nuqta al-Hanbali, very famous scholar. He is the author of Ikmal al-Ikmal. Likewise, the great Muhaddith Abu Abdullah Muhammad ibn Yusuf al-Birzali al-Andalusi, famous scholar, took knowledge from him. And from those who attended his classes and listened to him narrating the hadith is the famous scholar Al-Izz ibn Abd salam. Al-Izz ibn Abd salam is from his students. And likewise, from the famous scholars of hadith that were his students is Al-Sharif Izzuddin Ahmad ibn Muhammad al-Husayni, who died in the year 695. He is the man that authored the veil on the book of his teacher, Silatul Takmila. And he said that he studied with his Shaykh a great piece of beneficial narrations of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and I benefited from him tremendously. Izzuddin, his student, said about his Shaykh that he was unparalleled when it comes to knowing the hadith of Rasulullah. He used to know the authentic from that which is not authentic. He used to know those ahadith that have hidden flaws in them that only the scholars would know. He used to have a tremendous amount of knowledge regarding the rulings to be found in the ahadith and the meanings, and likewise the things that the scholars have debated in it. And he mentioned a number of other things that the Shaykh was extremely knowledgeable in. Abu al-Hasan al-Shadhili talks about something that was said to him that highlights an affair related to Al-Munthiree's classes. Abu al-Hasan al-Shadhili, he said, "It was said to me," someone said to him, "there is no class in fiqh more splendid than the class of a Shaykh Izzuddin ibn Abd salam, Al-Izz ibn Abd salam. And there is no class on the face of the earth in hadith more splendid than the class of a Shaykh Zakiyuddin Abdul Azim al-Munthiree. And there is no class on the face of the earth more splendid in the knowledge of application of the deen than your class." This was said to Abu Hasan al-Shadhili. And he had received the title Al-Hafiz before passing away by 30 years. He was given the title Al-Hafiz, the memorizer, before he died by 30 years. Why is this important? No.
Because he had time to add more to his hadith.
This is important because he had more time to learn and gain more knowledge. Okay, why else is it important? Nah.
Because of his young age?
Because his age at the time he received the title. Tayyib, what else?
The rank he held in the money.
Because of the rank itself. So what does the rank mean, Al-Hafiz? Let's read something together. Al-Khatib al-Baghdadi mentioned about the title Al-Hafiz. He said في الجامع, may Allah have mercy upon him, هي أعلى صفات المحدثين. This is the highest of the descriptions of the scholars of hadith. Yani, as you grow in the ranks and levels of the scholars of hadith, the very highest one is what? Al-Hafiz. So when you see the word Al-Hafiz next to the name of one of the scholars of hadith, you recognize now from the speech of Al-Khatib al-Baghdadi that this is what? The highest level. So this is why we have people like Al-Hafiz Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, right? And Al-Hafiz al-Haythami and others. Al-Hafiz al-Suyuti and so on. He further goes on to say, whoever has this description in him, his statements are to be accepted. And if he ranks a hadith as authentic or a hadith as inauthentic, this is to be what? Accepted. However, he said, those who deserve that title are very few. In fact, it is rare, perhaps impossible to find them. This is a very high level that only few men in history have reached. He met with the poets, he met with the linguists, and he took from their knowledge. And so his speech had the sweetness of the men of literature in it. An example of the sweet speech that he left behind are two lines of poetry in which he said, may Allah have mercy upon him, اعمل لنفسك صالحا لا تحتفل بظهور قيل في الأنام وقالي فالخلق لا يرجى اجتماع قلوبهم لا بد من مثن عليك وقالي. He said, perform good deeds for your own benefit. Do not pay mind to the appearance of a reputation among the people. قيل وقال. For indeed the creation, there is no hope that all their hearts will gather together. Yani everyone will like you. It is a must that someone will praise you, another will hate you. At-Taj al-Subki tells a story by which you can tell some of the qualities of the Shaykh in his conduct, in his religion. He said, I heard my father narrating on behalf of Al-Hafiz al-Dimyati, one of the students of Munthiree that we just spoke about, that the Shaykh one time went to Al-Hammam. Hammam is the title of these public baths that people used to use back then for medicinal purposes and so on and so forth. So he went one time to Al-Hammam, and the heat of it, it has heated water, had affected the Shaykh, so he could not walk. So he laid down on the road next to a store, to give himself a little rest before he can continue. So his student, Dimyati, he said to him, my teacher, my master, let me help you sit on the doorstep of the store. And the store was closed at the time. So the Shaykh said, while he was suffering like that, he couldn't even get up to sit on his own. He said, without the permission of the owner? And you want to make me sit on his step, on his doorstep, without his permission? And he refused to let his students help him sit on it. Another example is that which is narrated by his student Ibn Daqiq al-Eid, rahimahAllah ta'ala. And Ibn Daqiq al-Eid was himself a man who was considered extremely religious and pious and afraid of Allah, watchful of Allah in every small thing. Ibn Daqiq al-Eid, he said about his teacher al-Munthiree, كَانَ أَدْيَنَ مِنِّي. He had more deen, more religion than I. Al-Hafiz al-Dhahabi, he said about him in his biography, كَانَ الْإِمَامَ الثَّبْتِ. He was the trusted imam in the deen. Yani, in other words, what he said was based on knowledge, not just talking. وَكَانَ شَيْخَ الْإِسْلَامِ مَتِينَ الدِّيَانَةِ. And he was from the scholars that are numbered in Islam. His deen was solid, was strong. ذَا نُسُك, a man of worship. وَتَوَرُّعْ وَسَمْتْ وَجَلَالَةِ, a man who feared Allah, and he had a clear presentation of knowledge on his conduct. You could see it in his manners, in the way he walks, in the way he talks. He was a man that instantly struck awe in people that saw him. He died, may Allah have mercy upon him, inside the school Al-Kamiliyah on Saturday the 4th of Dhul Qa'dah in the years 56 and 600. The year 656. And his funeral was prayed repeatedly. It was prayed inside the school and it was prayed outside of the school. And many poets have said beautiful things in poetic verse about the Shaykh. May Allah have mercy upon him. He left behind a vast amount of knowledge. Books in Hadith. Books in history, books in fiqh, to the point that he left behind more than 20 titles, many of which the scholars had a great deal of interest in, such that they were explained by the people of knowledge. And so you can find his books along with their explanations by the people of knowledge. And some of the books he wrote, he had written in a topic that others before him had written in, or others in his time were writing in the same topic. However, his books for some reason would eclipse what came before or came along with, such that the books of others would not be known and his books would become famous around the world, and the students of knowledge would care for them. An example of that is his book At-Targhib wa-Tarhib, a book that shows the virtues of deeds and also the outcomes of sins. This is not the first book to be written in that topic. However, it is the book that first comes to mind whenever that topic is mentioned. At-Targhib wa-Tarhib, everybody says by Munthiree. However, there were other books written before in that topic that nobody remembers now. Likewise, his abridgment of Sahih al-Imam Muslim. He abridged the Sahih al-Imam Muslim, he condensed it. Another scholar in his era did the same thing. However, his book became very famous, and the book of the other scholar became unknown. And this is the bounty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He gives it to whom He wills. We ask Allah to have mercy upon him and to accept his good deeds and ours. And we ask Allah to benefit us with His knowledge and what He has left behind. The Shaykh began this treatise with a brief introduction. He began by praising Allah and issuing the testimony of faith, and likewise the exaltations and greetings upon the Messenger Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his family members, his companions, and those who follow in his footsteps. And then he said, "You have asked me to gather for you 40 ahadith that you will memorize from the ahadith of jurisprudence, min ahadith al-ahkam, that you will continue to study along with the passage of time. And you have mentioned that they should be without the chain of narrators to make the task at hand easy. And I have performed the istikhara, seeking Allah's guidance, and I have responded to your request and hastened to that which you want, and I have taken it out of that which Al-Bukhari and Muslim have narrated, or one of them has narrated." And he asked Allah to make it beneficial for himself and for the man who requested it and the remainder of the Muslims. Allah indeed is the most merciful of those who are merciful. And it seems that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has answered his dua. What started as something he wrote for the benefit, it seems, of one man who made that request, is now a book being studied all around the world in many different languages and memorized by so many students of fiqh as an introduction to the fiqh. Now, to make clear a number of important points. Firstly, these are ahadith in jurisprudence. In other words, they are ahadith in the applicable matters of the religion. In other words, they are not ahadith that show the virtues of deeds, or ahadith that warn against sin. They are not ahadith in aqidah, the belief system and the creed. Rather, they are ahadith specifically in jurisprudence, al-fiqh. Al-fiqh al-tatbiqi, al-amali. So in other words, they serve as the evidence for the practices of the Muslims. You will find herein issues of tahara, issues of salah, issues of siyam, etc. These are the kinds of ahadith to be expected here. And it is a very solid foundation because the Shaykh has selected these ahadith from the Sahih, either Sahih al-Imam Muslim or found in both Bukhari and Muslim, as we shall see his sources. May Allah have mercy upon him. And these ahadith, scholars have mentioned, the consensus of the ummah is that they are most authentic. The most authentic of the ahadith of Rasulullah are those that are found in Bukhari and Muslim or in one of them. Now someone may ask, why the number 40? How come we have the 40 ahadith of Munthiree, and before that we have seen the 40 ahadith of An-Nawawi? The reason that the scholars have chosen this number is because there is a narration from Rasulullah ﷺ, or I should say a narration attributed to Rasulullah ﷺ, but it's actually not authentic, that shows that it is virtuous to deliver 40 ahadith to the ummah. So a number of scholars have built upon that narration, and they have compiled a collection of 40 ahadith and tried to spread it in the ummah. This is why you find there are many books, not just these two, that all revolve around that theme, 40 ahadith. So for example, 40 ahadith in jihad, 40 ahadith in al-ahkam, etc., etc. that hadith that encourages this practice is not authentic. And some of the scholars that have used it know that it is not authentic, such as An-Nawawi, for example. He mentions in the introduction to the 40 hadith that this hadith is not authentic. So when that is the case, why did the scholars use it, knowing that it is not authentic? This is a very important question, right? If you know something is not authentic, why would you use it? We know that the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is complete and perfect. You don't need anything outside of that which is authentic and that which has come indeed from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So why would the scholars use something that they know is not authentic? Now.
For other ahadith.
For other ahadith. What the brother is trying to tell us that if there are other narrations that show that it is authentic, when they are all together put, then that makes it authentic. Is that what you're saying? No, that's not what you're trying to say. I misunderstood. Now.
Like the hadith, نَبَّرَ اللَّهُ مَرْأً سَمِعَ مَقَالَتِهِ فَوَعَلَهَا.
طيب, okay. Jazakallah khairan. So the brother is highlighting one of the reasons that the scholars will apply something weak, something found in a weak narration. And that is, as the brother explained, that there might be a strong hadith, an authentic hadith that encourages the same practice. So in our case, we have the hadith of Rasulullah encouraging that his sunnah be spread. May Allah make virile and healthy the face of a man who memorizes one of his ahadith and then delivers it to another person exactly like how he heard it or as he worded it, sallallahu alayhi wasallam. This hadith is clear proof that we should what? Spread the sunnah. What the brother is highlighting is that the scholars will use a weak hadith when there are other ahadith or other texts from the Quran that lead to the same practice. So if you have a weak hadith that says do this, but you have a strong hadith that says do this, you do it anyways because you have a strong hadith, right? And as for the extra details found in the weak hadith, you have hope that they may also be true. But you don't build your practice on it. This is a fine point. I don't know if I made it clear. Is it clear to everyone? No. Let me try again. Let's say you have a weak hadith that tells you to pray 2 rak'ahs in the time of al-duha. Right? You know it's weak. Should you or should you not pray 2 rak'ahs in the time of al-duha? The answer is you should. Why? Because there are other hadith that are authentic that teach you to do this. Clear? Fine. Now if that weak hadith says you will get a house in Jannah every time you pray 2 rak'ahs in the time of duha, should you believe that this is what you're going to get or not? No. You don't believe that because it's based on what? A weak hadith. But you should believe what is mentioned in the authentic ahadith. Whatever reward is mentioned in them, this is what you believe. But you have hope that what is mentioned in the weak hadith may actually be true. So you pray them anyways, hoping if it is true, I'm going to get it. If not, I'm going to get the reward that is found where? In the authentic ahadith. Is that clear? Why is this? Because sometimes a weak hadith will be a hadith that is not established. Not every time we say weak, it means it's a lie. Sometimes a weak hadith simply means what? Not established. In other words, it could become established. Maybe a researcher will come and he will dig through the books of hadith and he will search for all the different sources and he will find that this hadith is actually authentic. This is the case. Sometimes the hadith, you see it in your book clearly it is weak. But then another man comes who has more knowledge than yourself, and he looks for it in other books, and he says, by the way, this same hadith is found here, and here it's authentic. Same hadith. Right? So what appears to you to be inauthentic may be to a man who has more knowledge what? Authentic. This is one of the reasons why the scholars will apply a hadith that has a foundation in the strong hadith, although they know it is weak, because the default is what? They are building upon that which is authentic. So gathering a hadith and spreading them among the ummah is a practice that is established, whether that hadith is authentic in and of itself or not. Now, the last thing I want to mention tonight is that we should contemplate the reward of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for this student and for his shaykh. The student asked for something to study and memorize, and because of his question, the shaykh shared his knowledge. In other words, that one question was the reason for the multitudes in the ummah to benefit from this knowledge. So he is what? A partner in the reward. This shows you how blessed it is to be involved in the affair of knowledge. And that even a man who doesn't have knowledge may, because of a question, share in the reward that is being gotten by millions of people, because he's involved in what? In knowledge. The examples are very many. Imagine someone from our masjid inviting another man. He says to him, here's the link, listen to the class online. That man later on becomes a great scholar, and so many people benefit from him. But he started out as what? A student. He didn't know anything. He found a link, you sent it to him, he listened to it, and that was the reason and the seed that was planted that made him interested in knowledge. One day he became a great scholar. You get the reward for all that which is in his future because of starting me on this path. The Prophet ﷺ, he gave the principle and the rule: Man da'a ila al-huda, man da'a ila huda. Whoever calls to some guidance, then he shall get its reward and the reward of all of those who follow him upon it. Or kama qala sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And likewise the Shaykh, who had mercy in his heart and had care for his brothers in Islam, and he chose to answer the request even though it is clearly a request made by what? A beginner, a man at the very first steps of knowledge. The Shaykh didn't say to him, go study with someone else, and then when you learn a little bit, come study with me. He didn't say to him, when there is a large group of people and they all want to study this, then we could think about it. For one person, I'm not going to take the time to do. He didn't say any of these things. Rather, he sought Allah's guidance, and he thought about the benefit of this, and he made dua asking Allah to make it beneficial for him and for the student and for the remainder of the ummah, and Allah answered that dua. This shows you the importance of having that intention, counting on Allah Azza wa Jalla to multiply the rewards and to make these deeds that we do heavy on the scales. Without that from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what we do is what? Insufficient. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to have mercy on the Shaykh and to make this beneficial for all of us. Wallahu ta'ala a'lam. Wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammadin wa alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. We'll stop for the adhan.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمد رسول الله أشهد أن محمد رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
طيب, who has some benefits for us, Ikhwan? Abdullah.
You learn the knowledge. People have to follow the knowledge. Example of Hisham, he take knowledge from some Shaykh, and of his life, they take another knowledge from.
Jazakallahu khairan. The brother highlighted an important benefit, which is that in order for your knowledge to become beneficial for others, you have to benefit from the knowledge of others before you. And Munthiree, when he started, he was a student sitting in the classes of the scholars. But in the end of his life, he became what? The scholar. The students would sit in his classes. This is how the chain continues. From the time of Rasulullah ﷺ, the Messenger ﷺ, even he would sometimes sit with Jibreel, and Jibreel would teach him what Allah revealed. And then the Sahaba would sit with him ﷺ and take the knowledge from him. And then later on they became what? Teachers. And the Tabi'een and some of the younger Sahaba would take from the older ones. And so the chain continues until today. And if you attach yourself to this chain, you have to recognize that you are attaching yourself to a chain that goes all the way back to Muhammad ﷺ. You are sitting with men who sat with men, who sat with men, who sat with men, and so on, until you say, who sat with the Messenger ﷺ. This is the chain that we are looking at. Because there are people out there in the world that have never sat with anyone that has a chain going back to Rasulullah. Never. And so that blessing is missing from their lives. The blessing of attaching themselves to something that has a connection to Rasulullah. And the greatest of blessings attached to the Messenger ﷺ is his words that were left behind, and the scholars are spreading. That is the greatest blessing that was left behind, that we can attach ourselves to from the affair of Rasulullah ﷺ. Now, Uthman.
You learn that the title Hafiz is the biggest title for a scholar of Hadith.
Jazakallahu
Highest
khairan.
rank.
Ahsant. The title Hafiz today is misunderstood. Many people give the title to a person who memorizes the Quran, but really in the terminology of the scholars, it is the highest rank for a scholar of Hadith. When a scholar of Hadith reaches the highest level in the study of that particular discipline, he is then called a Hafiz. Na'am. And our scholar Al-Munthiree has attained that title before he died by a great amount of time. 30 years before he died. And we can ask a question, say, how old was he when he died? 75 years old? Ahsant. Jazakallah khair. He got that title when he was what? 45. Naina. Next benefit. Now,
if you show your children the guidance, Allah will guide them even in your absence.
Jazakallahu khairan. From the benefits that can be taken from this story is how his father simply started him on the path. His father died what? 1 year later. 591 was the first class. that he took his son to. 592, the father died. But look what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made come out of that. It's a tremendous amount of benefit that the ummah continues to benefit from until today. So don't look at the children and underestimate them. Look at the children as potentially the leaders of tomorrow, the scholars of tomorrow, the men who will carry the burdens of the ummah tomorrow. So invest in the children today to make them become great people. Unfortunately, we are in a time where there are many people who do not care about the children at all. All they care about is money. So they will sell you things to make money from you, although they know these things harm the children. They will sell you video games. They will sell you electronic devices to keep the children riveted like this for hours. They will sell you TV shows and programs for children. Networks that are filled with shows and actors and actresses or cartoons geared towards children to fill their minds with every kind of garbage you can imagine, so that they have no hope whatsoever of growing up to be anything worthwhile. This is destruction of the children, destruction of the talent pool that we have for tomorrow. So a Muslim who understands this should not let his children ever become another source of income for these criminals. These people are criminals. All they care about is the money. Some of them are more than that. Some of them are shayateen. They care about corrupting the children. They actually want this. Some companies now, they sell material geared towards children to teach children that it's okay to be homosexual. For children. Material for very small kids. I saw a children's story that is geared towards very small kids, to make it very simple, that so and so is my friend and he has 2 fathers. What is this supposed to teach the child? That it's okay to be homosexual. Towards very small children. They want to raise them upon this path of the shaitan. We ask Allah to protect us and our children from their evils. Some of them are like that. They are criminals. Do not let your children be exposed to them. Save them from this. In every way you can. Save them from the screens. Save them from mingling with them. Save them from sitting with them face to face. In every way you can. These children are your investment. You might be in your grave and your children are what you need to save you from a problem or to raise your rank. When you wish you could come out to just perform 2 rak'ah, your children may be making dua for you and that raises your rank. Aina. Jazakallah khair. One more. Yahya.
We learned that the Sheikh was so keen to learning that he even learned from scholars to places that he could not travel to by sending letters.
Jazakallah khairan. From the evidence showing how important knowledge was to the Shaykh is the fact that he would write to the scholars. He would send letters in areas that he could not travel to. Although he traveled extensively, traveled abundantly, he would write to these scholars in areas that he could not reach, asking them to share from their knowledge and to authorize him to narrate from them. And so they would write back and send him some of their knowledge, and they would share from what Allah Azza wa Jal has given them. He had an immense hunger for knowledge and for gathering the knowledge of other people to his own. And this shows you, ya ikhwan, that knowledge is not something you can ever get enough of. Many people, when they approach knowledge, they approach it with what? The idea that this is how much I need. There's no such thing. When it comes to knowledge, there is no amount of knowledge that is enough. The more you learn, the more you will love learning. The more you grow in it, the more you will want to grow in it. And to give you an example to highlight this point, look at the people of the dunya, right? Some brothers, they say, I'm coming to America, I'm going to stay here just for what? 3 years. I want to make $100,000 and I'm going back. You heard anything like this before? Anyone heard something like this before? Then what happened? 10 years later, you ask him, remember when you said this? Did you ever make $100? Yeah, I made it, but it was not enough. Did you ever build the house that you were trying to build? Yeah, I built the house, but the family is growing. You will find all kinds of excuses. Some people, they say, all I need is $1 million. Sometimes he makes it, and when he makes it, he says, I was wrong. I actually need what? This much. He gives you a new number. The number keeps on growing. Sometimes he makes that new number, and then he says, I was wrong. I actually need this much, and then things will be all right. Now, this is the affair with the dunya. What do you think then will be the affair with the akhirah? The children of Adam, Allah made us. We are insatiable. There's nothing that will satisfy us. So if you taste the sweetness and goodness of something, you keep wanting more of it. So you have to channel yourself. Put yourself on the track that you want to grow in. If you put yourself on the track of money, recognize the fact that you will never find enough. And you will keep wanting more. If you put yourself on the track of knowledge, also the same thing applies. One of them will benefit you in your grave, the other will not. The last thing I want to mention actually is, look how the Shaykh made the issue of knowledge easy and simple. The student said, I don't want the chain of narrators, take it out. He said, yeah. The Shaykh chose for him a hadith that are suitable for a beginner. The Shaykh chose for him a hadith found in Bukhari and Muslim, or just in one of the two. Right? All of this for what reason? To make the knowledge easy. You can teach someone in a way that is difficult, and discuss with them in a way that makes it hard to understand, and teach them things that are above their level. But that is not the way of the scholars. That actually causes the opposite effect, which is people will what? Turn away from the knowledge. A man wants to be called a scholar. He wants to show off his knowledge. He wants to show off how much he wants, how much he knows. But that will actually harm the students. Rather, as you can see here, the way of the scholars is, if there's a way to make the knowledge simple, they will make it simple. If there's a way to make it simpler, they will make it simpler. So for this reason, the Shaykh started him with this seed. So this is a seed. Inshallah, in this class we want to memorize all these 40 ahadith, and we will be holding a competition like we did previously. So I encourage all the brothers to begin memorizing. Soon, inshallah, we will have the full copies for you. This is just the introduction that we have tonight with us. But soon, inshallah, we will have all the copies distributed. I ask Allah Azza wa Jal to give me and you all tawfiq. Subhanallah wa bihamdik. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayka.